The bitterness of saffron is something you never forget. It has a metallic, earthy taste, like chewing on old coins and grave soil. In my first life, I learned that taste too late, gulping down the tainted honey lemon tea my stepsister, Serafina, had prepared for me on the morning of the Imperium Scholar qualifiers. The cramps had been immediate and violent, a hot knife twisting in my gut. I remember the stunned silence of the examination hall, the scrape of my chair as I doubled over, and the horrified gaze of the invigilator as he saw the dark, crimson stain blooming through my light-colored trousers. My father, Alistair, later dismissed it with a wave of his hand. Serafina is just high-spirited, he'd said, his attention already drifting back to his newspaper. My stepmother, Isolde, heavily pregnant, had sniffed derisively. So much blood from a simple cycle? Perhaps she's been reckless. My grandmother, a woman whose heart was as narrow as her purse strings, had simply clicked her tongue. Always so costly. Why must you be so fragile? I was not fragile. I was poisoned. I died in my childhood bedroom, my body cold and empty, the life bleeding out of me while my family embarked on a company retreat to the Sunstone Isles. They forgot me. The neighbors complained about the smell days later. The last thought to cross my mind was a searing, white-hot spike of refusal. Asterisk, I do not accept this. Asterisk, when I opened my eyes, the digital clock on my bedside table glowed 5:30 a.m. The morning of the qualifiers. The ghost of that agonizing pain still echoed in my nerves. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the air tasting not of death, but of second chances. Downstairs, the house was quiet. I moved on silent feet, a ghost in my own past. There, on the kitchen counter, sat the thermos of honey lemon tea, its innocuous yellow surface hiding its vile secret. Next to it was Isolde's favorite ceramic mug, a quarter full of the thick, herbal, calming blend she swore by for her nerves. It was a murky, reddish-brown liquid, not dissimilar in hue to my tea. My hands did not shake as I poured the poison tea down the sink and watched it swirl away. Then, with a calm that felt both alien and righteous, I filled the clean thermos with Isolde's bitter brew. I left the mug empty in the sink. A soft creak on the stairs made me freeze. Serafina peered into the kitchen, her face a mask of feigned concern. "Alara, you're up early. Don't forget your tea for the exam. I made it extra strong for you." Her eyes darted to the thermos in my hand, a flicker of satisfaction in their depths. "Thank you, Sarah," I said, my voice steady. "That was thoughtful." I hefted the thermos. "I'll be sure to drink every last drop." I walked out of the kitchen, leaving her standing there. For the first time in either of my lives, I felt a sliver of power. The game had begun again, but this time I knew all the moves. That evening, long after I had completed the first exam paper with a clear head and a calm body, the sound of a siren pierced the twilight, wailing its way to our doorstep. It was not for me. From my bedroom window, I watched as Isolde was carried out on a stretcher, her face ashen, a stark red stain darkening her maternity dress. Alistair followed, his face a portrait of panic, while Serafina wept hysterically on the porch. I took a slow sip of water, the cool liquid a balm. The ambulance's rotating lights painted my room in fleeting strokes of crimson and blue, a spectacle of their own making. They had intended a tragedy for me. I had simply redirected it. This life, I vowed silently to the retreating siren, would be different. I would not hunger for my father's love, Isolde's approval, or my grandmother's miserly affection. I would hunger only for what was rightfully mine, a future and a reckoning. The house, in their absence, was a cathedral of silence. I slept a deep, dreamless sleep, untroubled by cramps or the specter of betrayal. The following morning, I arrived at the examination center with a clear mind, the previous day's chaos feeling like a distant, satisfying dream. The questions on the page were not obstacles, but old acquaintances. I greeted them with the ease of one who had already faced them down once before. My pen moved with a confident rhythm, inscribing not just answers, but the blueprint of my escape. It was late that evening when my father finally called. His voice, usually an instrument of command, was frayed with a fatigue I had never heard directed at me. "Alara." A pause, a staticky breath. "The baby, he's here. Early. They've named him Leo." I could hear the forced joy beneath the exhaustion, the sound of a man trying to convince himself. "He's small. Needs an incubator. Blue light for the jaundice." Through the receiver, I could just make out my grandmother's voice, sharp with acquisitive excitement.
A boy.
Alistair, have you chosen a name? Leo, my father repeated, and this time the pride felt more genuine. Isolde and I decided on it years ago. I smiled, a thin, bloodless expression. That's a strong name, Dad. I remembered, with the clarity of a remembered insult, asking him as a child what my own name, Elara, meant. He'd been distracted, annoyed. Something from a myth. He'd brushed me off. A moon, I think, cold and distant. Now I understood. Leo, the lion. Elara, the forgotten satellite. The calculus was simple. A week later, the qualifiers were over. I could no longer use them as a shield, and a summons came. My presence was required at the hospital. Isolde was recovering, and the lion cub needed his pride. I arrived not with flowers, but with purpose. Before entering the private ward, I paused, hearing the murmur of voices within. Isolde's was a petulant whine. Alistair, my ankles are still so swollen. That useless nurse doesn't massage them properly. Then let your mother do it, my father replied, his tone distracted. Mother's hands are rough. Elara, she had such a gentle touch. It's a shame she's so busy now. The implication hung in the antiseptic air. She wanted me back on duty, playing the devoted, servile daughter. I pushed the door open. Busy, I echoed, my voice bright and carrying. Not at all, stepmother. The exams are finished. I have nothing but time to dedicate to you and little Leo. I saw the flicker of alarm in my father's eyes before he could mask it. The last thing he wanted was a scene, a reminder of the daughter he'd so easily disregarded. That won't be necessary, he said brusquely. The hospital staff is adequate. But Dad, I pressed, injecting a note of wounded sincerity. I want to help. I've even been reading about postpartum care. I'm sure I could be of use. I took a step toward the bed, and Isolde actually flinched, pulling the sheets higher. My father moved to block my path, a human shield for his fragile first love. I said no, Elara. His voice was final, a door slamming shut. We have it handled. You should go focus on your university applications. It was a dismissal, but it tasted like victory. I had forced him to explicitly reject my help, to establish a boundary that protected my freedom. I nodded, feigning disappointment. Of course. If you change your mind. I left the hospital, the sterile air replaced by the city's humid breath. The task of caring for Isolde, I knew, would now fall to Serafina. The thought was a small, dark comfort. Let her feel the weight of that expectation. Let her wrists ache from the massage she'd so cleverly avoided. My war was not with a spoiled girl, but with the architecture of the family itself. And I was just beginning to learn how to dismantle it, brick by calculated brick. The silence in the house upon their return was a different creature altogether. It was not the peaceful quiet of absence, but a thick, tense stillness, punctuated by the newborn's fragile cries and Isolde's weary sighs. My father moved through the rooms like a ghost, his attention wholly consumed by the infant son he believed carried his legacy. I became a phantom in my own home, a periphery figure they had no energy to manage. It was in this strained atmosphere that Serafina began to unravel. The burden of caregiving, once mine, now fell squarely on her shoulders. I would watch her sometimes, through the cracked door of the living room, kneading Isolde's swollen feet with a grimace of resentment etched on her face. Her once manicured nails were chipped, her wrists often red and strained. One evening, as I passed by with a glass of water, I paused. Your hands look so sore, Sarah, I said, my voice laced with a sympathy I did not feel. It must be exhausting. I offer to help, but you know how Dad is. He only trusts you with something this important. Her head snapped up, her eyes glittering with unshed tears of frustration. It's not fair, she hissed, low enough so her mother wouldn't hear. You got to just study and take your exams. I have to do everything now. And I have finals too. I shrugged, a carefully calibrated gesture of powerlessness. I know, but you're the dependable one, the reliable daughter. I'm just the academic. I let the words hang, a poison of their own making. They'd never ask me to do this. They know I wouldn't be as good as you. The seed took root. Later that night, a crash came from Isolde's room, followed by the sound of Serafina's raised voice. I am not your servant. Do you know I failed my history mock because I was up with him all night? Do you even care? Isolde's reply was cold, sharp. You are his sister. This is what family does. Must everything be a competition with you? If you applied half the effort to your studies that you do to your self-pity, you might actually be as accomplished as Alara. The mention of my name was the final spark. I heard a second, softer crash, a pillow thrown, perhaps, and the slam of a door. The symphony of resentment was playing its first movement. The next day, I found Serafina sulking on the back patio. I sat beside her, not too close, and offered a small, tasseled hair tie I no longer wore. Here. It's pretty. Seems more your style than mine. She eyed it, then me, with suspicion. Why are you being nice? I'm not being nice, I said truthfully. I'm being pragmatic. We're both trapped here, just in different cages. I nodded toward the house. And it seems like your cage is getting smaller. First it was your time. Now it's your achievements. Soon it'll be everything else. That baby in there isn't just a brother, Sarah. He's a replacement. She was silent for a long time, turning the hair tie over in her reddened hands. The fight seemed to drain out of her, replaced by a cold, dawning understanding. The carefully constructed world, where she was the cherished daughter, was showing its cracks, and I was merely pointing them out. I had not forgiven her for the saffron. I would never forget the metallic taste of betrayal or the cold loneliness of my first death. But a tool, I had learned, need not be liked to be useful. It need only be effective. And a scorned sister, her love curdled into envy, was becoming a very sharp tool indeed. The air in the house grew thicker, a soup of unspoken grievances and sleepless nights. My father, Alistair, navigated it all with a peculiar, single-minded focus. Little Leo was his son, and the rest of us, Isolde, Serafina, and myself, were merely planets in a decaying orbit. His business, once his primary mistress, was now a neglected distraction. I watched him from a distance, this man who had so easily dismissed my death, now meticulously tracking feeding times and diaper changes. It was in this environment that my acceptance letter from the Ethelgard University arrived. It was not just an acceptance, it was a triumphant one, accompanied by a scholarship offer that gleamed with promise. I left the thick, embossed envelope on the kitchen counter, a deliberate, silent challenge. My father noticed it that evening. He picked it up, his brow furrowed not in pride, but in mild annoyance, as if it were another bill. Ethelgard, he read aloud, the name tasting foreign on his tongue. That's in the north, isn't it? A long way. Isolde, nursing Leo on the sofa, let out a soft, calculated sigh. So far. And for what? A literature degree? It's not as if it's a practical field. The costs, Alistair. Even with a scholarship, the living expenses. She let her voice trail off, expertly weaving financial concern with subtle dismissal. This was the moment. The bet he had so carelessly made weeks ago, forgotten in the haze of his new son's life, now needed to be called due. It's not just for the degree, Dad, I said, my voice calm but clear, cutting through the domestic tension. It's for the house. Remember? Our agreement. If I got into a Tier 1 university, you buy me an apartment there. A full payment. The silence that followed was profound. Serafina, who had been scrolling listlessly on her phone, looked up, her interest piqued. Isolde's face went rigid, a mask of porcelain threatening to crack. House. My father blinked, the memory visibly returning to him. He waved a hand, a gesture meant to shoo away a triviality. Alara, that was a figure of speech. A motivator. You understand how things are now. Leo's needs, the medical bills from the premature birth. I understand a promise, I replied, my gaze steady. I upheld my end. I scored in the top percentile. I earned my place. Ethelgard isn't just any university, it's the cornerstone of the future you wagered. I reached into my bag and produced the written agreement I had made him sign, the paper now slightly crumpled, but the words stark and undeniable. It's all here. A 4-bedroom penthouse in the Ethelgard spires. You signed it. Isolde found her voice, a sharp, brittle thing. A penthouse? For a child? Alistair, this is absurd. That money is for our son's future, for his education fund. The future you're so concerned about, I said, turning my eyes to her, was almost a future I never had. Or have you forgotten the calming tea so quickly? The color drained from her face. She had no retort. The ghost of her own scheming hung between us, a secret she dared not give voice to in front of my father. My father looked from my resolute face to Isolde's panicked one, to the document in his hand. His pride, that fragile, towering thing, was on the line. To renege would be to admit he was not a man of his word, a perception he could not afford, even in his own home. Enough, he said, his voice a low growl of finality. He stared at Isolde. I made a promise. I will honor it. He then looked at me, a flicker of his old, cold authority in his eyes. But understand, Alara, this is it. This is your inheritance, advanced. Do not come to me for more. I simply nodded, a slow, deliberate dip of my chin. I had no need for his future favors. I had just secured my freedom. The penthouse was not merely a property, it was a fortress, a declaration of independence. They could keep their gilded cage of a home, with its crying air and simmering resentments. I was building my own kingdom, brick by legal, unassailable brick. And the first stone was now laid. The victory of the penthouse contract was a quiet, simmering thing. I did not gloat. To do so would have been to acknowledge their power to grant or deny, a power I was systematically dismantling. Instead, I observed. I watched Isolde's smiles grow more strained, her compliments to my father more cloying, as she calculated the financial blow my triumph had dealt to her son's future. I saw Serafina watching her mother, a new, cold understanding in her eyes. The replacement was not just a sibling, he was a drain on the resources she had once considered her birthright. It was in this climate that Serafina sought me out. She found me in the library, a book open but unread on my lap. She stood awkwardly in the doorway, the tasseled hair tie I had given her wrapped tightly around her finger. She's going to try to stop you from going, she said without preamble, her voice low. I looked up, feigning mild curiosity. Isolde? I have the signed agreement. The penthouse is mine. Not the penthouse. Serafina shook her head, stepping fully into the room and closing the door behind her with a soft click. Ethelgard. She's going to sabotage your university application. This was new. A fresh, venomous twist. I kept my expression neutral. How? She has your student portal login. She had me get it weeks ago, when you were distracted with exams. Serafina's words came out in a rushed, confessional torrent. She plans to wait until the last day of the acceptance window, log in as you, and decline the offer. Then she'll use the money meant for your penthouse to set up a Leonidas trust fund. She spat the name, Leo, as if it were a curse. I leaned back, the leather of the chair creaking softly. The malice was so petty, so perfectly Isolde. It wasn't enough to simply have what she wanted. She had to actively strip it from me. And you're telling me this because? Serafina's gaze dropped to the floor. She pinched me, she mumbled. Yesterday, when I told her my wrist hurt too much to massage her feet, she said I was being dramatic, that I should be more grateful. She looked up, and the hurt in her eyes had crystallized into something harder, sharper. I thought about it all night. That trust fund, the penthouse. I'd rather you have it than him. It was not loyalty. It was an alliance born of shared venom, a serpent turning on the hand that had been feeding it scraps. I felt no gratitude, only a cold assessment of her usefulness. The login credentials, I said, my voice devoid of warmth. Change them. Now. Use something she would never guess. A slow, sly smile touched her lips. It was the first genuine expression I had seen on her face in weeks. I already did. I nodded. The tool was proving its edge. Good. Then let her plan her little sabotage. It will be a pleasant surprise for her when it fails. I turned back to my book, a clear dismissal. Serafina lingered for a moment before slipping back out. The house was quiet, but the silence now felt different. It was no longer just tense. It was conspiratorial. The battlefield had shifted. Isolde was plotting in the open, believing herself secure. But she had failed to notice that the daughter she commanded had grown teeth of her own, and they were now bared not at me, but at the golden child who had stolen her world. I had no need to fight her directly. I only needed to keep sharpening the tools she herself had created. The penthouse contract was secured, a cold, hard fact in a house built on shifting sands. But a fortress is only as strong as the land it stands upon. I needed to know the full topography of my power, to understand the resources my mother, in her foresight, had left me. The business card lawyer he had given me felt like a key, worn smooth by time and waiting. I met him in an office that spoke of quiet, understated wealth, a world away from my father's gilded displays. He was a man with calm eyes that held no pity, only a measured assessment. Ilara, he began, steepling his fingers. Your mother was not just prudent. She was a visionary. Before her passing, she initiated a legal separation of assets. The house your father and his family currently occupy is held in a trust. You became the sole beneficiary upon your 18th birthday. A thrill, sharp and cold, shot through me. The very roof over their heads was mine. But he wasn't finished. There is also the matter of her liquid assets and her shares in your father's company, Crestwall Enterprises. He slid a document across the polished mahogany. She had a particular knack for strategic investment. The initial capital of $8 million has, under managed growth, appreciated significantly. The current value of the portfolio is approximately $32 million. The number hung in the air, not as a mere figure, but as a physical force. $32 million. It was a sum that could not be dismissed, could not be rationalized away as a child's fantasy. It was autonomy, rendered in pure, unassailable mathematics. The shares I managed, my voice steady despite the storm inside. What is my position? You hold a controlling 48% of Crestwall, he replied. Your father holds 47%, with the remainder scattered among minor investors. Your mother's shares were always held in trust for you. He merely voted them on your behalf until you came of age. The pieces of my mother's final design clicked into place, with dizzying clarity. She hadn't just left me an inheritance, she had left me the throne. My father, the proud king of his crumbling castle, was, and always had been, a regent. His authority was an illusion I could revoke at any moment. And if I were to sell my shares? I asked, the idea forming, crystalline and ruthless. Lawyer, he allowed a faint, approving smile. It would trigger a corporate upheaval. Any competitor would pay a premium for a controlling stake in Crestwall. It would likely force a hostile takeover, effectively ousting your father from the company he built. Asterisk the company he built. Asterisk the phrase was a lie. He had built it on my mother's capital, her connections, her quiet genius. And he had forgotten that. I left the office, the documents secured in my bag, feeling the weight of the world had redistributed itself onto my shoulders. I was no longer just a girl seeking revenge for a stolen life. I was the majority shareholder. I was the landlord. I was the architect of their future, and I held the blueprints to its ruin. The family home now felt like a stage, and I the only one who could see the wires holding the scenery aloft. I watched my father coo over Leo, saw Isolde preen under his deluded attention, and observed Serafina's simmering rage. They were players in a drama, believing the script was theirs to write. They did not know the theater itself belonged to me, and I was considering whether to simply evict the actors or burn the whole production to the ground. With the weight of my true inheritance settled upon me, a strange calm descended. The frantic energy of survival cooled into the patient, methodical work of demolition. I became a scholar of their ruin, observing the fissures in our family foundation with academic detachment. The first crack splintered from Serafina. The burden of care, the stolen resources, the constant praise heaped upon the mewling infant, it had fermented into a venom she could no longer contain. I found her one afternoon staring at Leo as he slept in his ornate crib, her expression not of sisterly affection, but of cold, clinical assessment. He has her eyes, she murmured, not turning to me. Not father's. Isolde's. Genetics are curious, I replied neutrally, leaning against the doorframe. It's more than that, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. The shape of the ears. The way his hairline is forming. She finally looked at me, her eyes sharp with a desperate, conspiratorial light. It doesn't look like anyone in our family at all. I said nothing, letting her suspicion hang in the air, allowing it to grow roots. I had my own suspicions, nurtured in silence. My father's car, chauffeured by the ever-present Marcus, was too often dispatched for Isolde solo appointments. My father, so proud of his virility in producing a son in his later years, was blind to the timeline, to the whispers. I decided to feed the beast, not with confirmation, but with possibility. I began leaving certain things within Serafina's reach, a forgotten, outdated family photo album showing the distinct graystone earlobes my father possessed, an open tab on a shared computer displaying articles on dominant and recessive genes. I was not planting evidence. I was watering the seeds of doubt she herself had sown. The unraveling accelerated at Leo's lavish, one-month celebration. The event was Isolde's attempt to reassert her status, a performance of domestic bliss funded by the capital I now legally controlled. The air was thick with the cloying scent of lilies and false congratulations. Then, the highlight, the 1-month grasping ceremony. A velvet cushion was laid before the baby, bearing a tiny gavel for leadership, a gold coin for wealth, and a stethoscope for a prestigious career. The guests cooed as Leo's tiny, flailing hand brushed against the coin. Isolde beamed, squeezing my father's arm.
A financier.
Just like his father. It was then that Serafina, standing at the periphery, spoke loud enough to slice through the chatter. Or a chauffeur. She was looking directly at Marcus, who stood rigid by the door, his face a sudden, stark white. A frozen silence fell. Isolde's smile did not so much fall as shatter. My father's head swiveled between his daughter and his driver, confusion rapidly curdling into something darker. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. Serafina, emboldened by the tension, gave a brittle laugh. "Nothing, father. I just said, he has such a strong grip. He must get it from your side of the family." Her eyes, however, remained locked on Marcus, conveying a message as clear as a subpoena. The spell of the perfect family was broken. The rest of the party passed in a strained murmur, the guests avoiding my father's thunderous gaze and Isolde's rigid smile. The questions were now out in the open, buzzing invisibly in the gilded air. I retreated to a corner, an untouched glass of champagne in my hand. I had not needed to lift a finger. I had only to sharpen the knife, and Serafina, in her beautiful, reckless rage, had wielded it. The foundation was cracking. Soon it would be time to bring the whole structure down. And I had the deeds to the land and the patience to watch it fall. The gilded cage was now a pressure cooker. In the days following the celebration, my father, Alistair, moved through the house like a storm cloud, his silence more threatening than any outburst. He could not yet articulate the suspicion Serafina had so deftly poisoned him with, but it festered, turning his every glance at little Leo into a silent, tortured inquiry. Isolde, sensing the shift, became brittle and overly bright, her laughter a sharp, false note in the tense atmosphere. I knew the final act was approaching. It was time to move from subtle manipulation to decisive action. I retreated to the study one evening, the room that had always been my father's sanctuary, a symbol of his authority. Now it felt like the command center for his impending downfall. First, the company. Using the access granted by my majority stake, I initiated a quiet, systematic sale of my Crestwall shares. I didn't dump them on the open market. That would cause panic and devalue my own asset. Instead, I sold them in large, strategic blocks to a rival conglomerate, Ethelgard Holdings, which had long-eyed Crestwall's prime contracts. The process was swift, clinical. With each transaction, my father's operational control eroded, though he remained blissfully unaware, too consumed by domestic suspicion to notice the corporate coup unfolding in his name. Next, the eviction. I had lawyer, he draw up the paperwork. It was not a request. It was a notice of termination of tenancy, addressed to Alistair Greystone and Isolde Vane for the property held in the Alara Greystone Trust. The reason stated was simple: for the beneficiary's personal use. I signed it with a flourish, the pen feeling like a scepter. The final piece was the paternity. I had not been idle. While Serafina nurtured her doubts, I had cultivated certainty. A discarded coffee cup from Marcus, a stray hair from Leo's blanket. It was shockingly easy to obtain the necessary samples. The lab report now lay in a sealed envelope on my desk, a truth as cold and factual as the 32 million in my bank account. I did not deliver the blows myself. I believed in delegation. The following morning, 2 deliveries arrived simultaneously. A courier handed my father a thick, legal envelope from he and associates. At the same time, his phone erupted with calls from his frantic board members. Ethelgard Holdings was now the majority shareholder and was calling an emergency meeting. I watched from the top of the stairs as he tore open the envelope. His face, first confused at the legal jargon, then purpling with rage as he comprehended the eviction notice, was a masterpiece of catharsis. The phone slipped from his hand, his board member's tinny, panicked voice still squawking from the floor. "What is the meaning of this?" he roared, his voice cracking as he looked up and saw me. Before I could answer, Isolde hurried in, drawn by the commotion. "Alistair, what's wrong?" He thrust the eviction notice at her. "We're being thrown out. By my own daughter." Her eyes scanned the document, widening in horror. Then, her gaze fell on the second, smaller envelope I had deliberately left on the hall table. She recognized the lab's logo. Her hand trembled as she picked it up, her face draining of all color. "And that," I said, my voice calm and clear in the cavernous foyer, "is the answer to the question you've been too afraid to ask." She didn't need to open it. My expression, Serafina's triumphant smirk from the doorway, and Marcus's abrupt and unexplained resignation that very morning told her everything. The carefully constructed life of lies she had built came crashing down around her in the space of a single minute. My father looked from her devastated face to my impassive one, the final, terrible piece of the puzzle slotting into place. The company, the house, the sun, all were illusions, all were mine to take back. I descended the stairs slowly, not stopping as I passed them. I picked up my car keys and the single bag I had packed. "The locks will be changed by end of day," I stated, not looking back. "I'd suggest you start packing." I walked out of the house, the morning sun warm on my face. Behind me was the sound of a marriage shattering, of a kingdom falling. Ahead of me was the road to Ethelgard, to my penthouse, to my future. The ledger was, at last, balanced. The silence that followed my departure was not one I could hear, but I could feel it, a vast, echoing void where a family had once existed. I did not wait to witness the demolition. Some ruins are best viewed from a distance, once the dust has settled. I immersed myself in the new life I had carved from the wreckage of the old. Ethelgard University was a sanctuary of cold stone and colder reason, a place where lineage was less important than intellect. My penthouse, with its sweeping views of the city, was a testament to a promise enforced, a kingdom of one. I enrolled in law and finance, subjects that taught me how to fortify the walls I had built. Weeks later, the news of the collapse reached me in fragments, like pieces of a stained glass window shattering one by one. The first fragment was financial. Crestwall Enterprises, stripped of its core assets and direction, was acquired by Ethelgard Holdings in a fire sale. My father, Alistair, was not just ousted, he was rendered irrelevant. The man who had defined himself by his business found himself with nothing to command. The second fragment was domestic. The eviction stood. Lawyer, he informed me that Isolde had fled, taking Leo with her. She did not go to Marcus. The driver had vanished, likely fearing legal repercussions or my father's wrath. She retreated to a distant relative, her reputation in tatters, her golden child now a burden tied to a scandal. My father, unable to pay the mounting debts with his assets frozen in the corporate dissolution, was forced to rent a small, dismal apartment in a part of the city he would have once scorned. The third fragment was familial. Serafina, in a final act of defiance, had emancipated herself. She used the digital evidence of neglect and the toxic environment to petition the courts, and with a small trust fund our mother had secretly left for her, a fact I reluctantly revealed to her, she enrolled in a design school on the other side of the country. She sent me a single, terse message. Asterisk, it's done. Asterisk, I thought that was the end of it. I had my victory, clean and absolute. But the past has a way of demanding a final audience. He appeared at my university office, a shell of the man I remembered. Alistair's suit was wrinkled, his hair unkempt, and the aura of authority he had always carried was gone, replaced by a palpable desperation. "Ilara," he began, his voice raspy. "You have to help me. They've taken everything." I said nothing, letting the silence press down on him. "It was her," he insisted, a familiar anger flaring in his eyes. "Isolde. She deceived me. That boy, he is not my blood. My legacy." His voice broke, not in grief for a child, but for a broken lineage. "You had a legacy," I said, my voice quiet and steady. "Her name was Ilara. You just never saw her." He flinched as if struck. For a moment, the carefully constructed narrative of himself as the wronged patriarch crumbled, and I saw a glimpse of the hollow man beneath. But it was fleeting. "I am still your father," he said, the words a plea and a command all at once. "Are you?" I asked. I opened a drawer and took out a small, faded photograph I kept there. It was of my mother, a rare, unguarded laugh on her face. "You were her husband. You were my father. Those were titles you held, not roles you fulfilled." I placed the photo on the desk between us. "You speak of legacy as if it is a thing you pass down, like a watch or a ring. But a true legacy is built in the daily acts of love and protection. You built yours on sand and lies. It washed away. That is not my failure to rectify." He stared at the photograph, then at me, and I saw the final, terrible understanding dawn in his eyes. He had not come to make amends. He had come to find a new asset to manage, a new source of sustenance. And I was no longer available. He left without another word, his shoulders slumped in a defeat that was, at last, complete. I turned back to the window, watching the lights of the city begin to glitter in the twilight. There was no triumph in this moment, only a profound and quiet solitude. The ghosts of my past were laid to rest. The House of Greystone was not just empty, it was dissolved, its foundations exposed as rotten, its crown revealed to be made of ashes. I had not simply survived them. I had outgrown them. And in the vast, quiet expanse of my future, that was the only victory that truly mattered.